All right. Hello again, adventures, and welcome to another exciting episode of Discovering New Dragons, where we go into the wilderness that is the RPG, the tabletop RPG market, and we discover our next legendary creature that may become the focus of a new adventure or an entire new campaign. So, today, we are going to be looking at something I didn't realize existed. I didn't realize how much I needed this in my life. We are going to be looking at Talisman Adventures. For those of you that do not know, first of all, there is a board game that has been around, I think, since like the 90s, called Talisman. Talisman is one of my personal favorite board games. I've never played the physical version of it because it's ungodly expensive. But I not only have the digital version of it on Steam, I have every single expansion, additional character, everything that has ever been released for it. I am obsessed with this game. It is a remarkably simple game. Basically, what you do, you choose a character, and then you move around this board that has three concentric circles, effectively, that you can go on. You start in what's called the outer ring, then there's the middle ring, and then there is the inner ring. And your goal is to get from the outer ring to the inner ring and get to what's called the Crown of Command. And the first character that gets there, depending on the win condition, generally has a way to basically kill off the other characters and win the game. However, to get there, you have to get your character stronger. And the way you do that is by fighting and killing creatures, finding new magic items and followers. And that's kind of the whole point of the game, is you go around to various places. You pull encounter cards from a deck that sometimes turn into monsters. You look for magic items, things like that. It is a remarkably simple idea, and everything is solved by rolling a d6 or 2d6. I can't actually remember off the top of my head right now. I believe it's just a d6, but I might be wrong. Anyway, so it's a remarkably simple game because of how much of the game is built on randomness. It is a game that can last forever. I have played games of Talisman that after 4 hours we were no closer to someone being able to get into the inner ring and get to the Crown of Command and win than we were during our first hour. But it's really, really fun. It's a great way to ruin friendships. So that's the board game. And like I said, it's been around since I think the 90s, but the most current iteration of it, I think, came out sometime in after 2010, I believe. And it's a really fun game. Like I say, I play the Steam version of it. I guess fairly often. It's probably the game I've played the most as far as multiplayer games are concerned with my other friends, which says a lot about how often I play multiplayer games with other friends. But yeah, it's just super, super fun. So Talisman Adventures is a tabletop RPG version of the game. And the interesting thing about it is it does keep that kind of feeling of a lack of complexity. Like, you're not really going to be able, in the board game, you're not really going to be able to min-max your character. You just aren't. Everything, because it's decided by either drawing cards from a deck or from rolling a die, you're not really going to be able to plan for everything. There is strategy involved, but it's relatively limited, and your luck is going to be just as impactful on your success as your knowledge of the game itself. The same can kind of be said about Talisman Adventures, in the idea that if you're looking for an RPG that you can just massively min-max and create this really unique character that's like no other character that's ever played the game, you're probably going to be a little bit disappointed. The game itself, you have two things that you choose. You choose your ancestry and you choose your class. And the classes themselves are pretty cookie cutter. The class comes with a few abilities, and generally at level 1, you will get one choice for the class, which basically allows you to kind of give it a subclass where you will focus on one aspect of the class slightly. And that's really about it. As you level up, every level you can take, what are they called? You can take what are called advanced special abilities. And those are, they have generic ones or general ones, and then they have ones that are specific to your class. It goes up to level 10, so you get a total of 9 special abilities, and most classes have like 8-ish that you can choose. So a lot of times, if you have 2 players that are going to be playing the same class, they're going to feel kind of redundant because they're going to effectively be the same person. Even your starting equipment and everything is given to you. Like, you don't choose your equipment, you have it. So yeah, but probably one of the more unique aspects about this compared to something like D&D, which is what we're generally going to be comparing things to, there's technically only 2 there's only 2 quote unquote stats in this, which are strength and craft, which if you've played Talisman, the board game, you'll recognize. Strength is what you use for melee combat, craft is what you use for psychic combat, and craft also decides how many spells you can have. So they do the same thing here. They do have kind of a subdivisions of strength and craft, which are called aspects. But for the most part, a lot of the time, you're going to be just using your strength or your craft for most of your rolls and the things like that. They do use an encumbrance system. I've never been a huge fan of encumbrance systems, but it's there. It's relatively simple. Speed is based on meters, which I found kind of interesting. Probably because the company that makes this, Pegasus Spiel, is a German-based company, so obviously metric system makes a lot more sense for anyone in Europe to use. But they do have like maps, and like they have an intro adventure in here, and they do have maps, and they do use a grid, but each grid is 1 square meter instead of a 5-foot square, which technically means the world is slightly smaller. A meter, for any Americans that are not good at doing the conversions, a meter is slightly longer than a yard. A yard is 3 feet. A meter is about 3.2-ish feet. So if you want to use the imperial system, replacing meter with yard will generally not create a massive difference. Again, you're losing about 1/5 of a foot, which doesn't translate super well to inches because there's 12 inches to a foot, and so a fifth of to 12 is technically 2.4 inches or 2.5 inches. So math is fun. Anyway, and they do have spells and a spell point system and things like that. But probably what I think is one of the more unique aspects of the game is how you decide your successes and failures, specifically how combat works as well. It is effectively a 3d6 system. What that means is most of the rolls you're going to be making, you're going to be rolling a number of d6s. From what I've seen in here, they mention 1d6, 2d6, 3d6. It looks like all of your skill tests, or whatever they call them in this. I'm trying to see. I'll go to the glossary of terms. What is Talisman Adventures? Glossary of game terms. As engine a bonus die class to use success. We'll deal with that in a second. So yeah, they just call them tests, and they have different kind of tests, like guide test, hunter test, things like that. So, for every test I've seen thus far, you roll 3d6. But one of the unique things about it, kind of similar to the age system. I'm most familiar with the Age system through the Dragon Age RPG, but they have Fantasy Age and Modern Age. If anyone remembers Geek and Sundry, back when Geek and Sundry was actually creating content and not just putting up stuff that Nerdist put up. Geek and Sundry was partnered with Will Wheaton for a while. He made a series called Tabletop, which was massively influential to the tabletop market across the world. But one of the other things he did was he ran his own custom RPG game called Titan's Grave, Ashes of Valhalla, where he made up the world, and they used the Modern Age system for that to create their own thing. It was pretty cool. So in the Age system, you have what's called a stunt die. It's still a 3d6 based system, very, very different from Talisman Adventures. But you have what's called a stunt die, where one of the dice has to be different. In the Dragon Age RPG, it's called the Dragon Die. And so in this, you do have a stunt die, but it's not called the stunt die. It's called the Kismet die. And it effectively is how you get your critical successes and critical failures. So effectively what happens is if you roll 3d6 and you roll a 1 on your Kismet die, that's kind of like your critical fail. Something bad is going to happen. And if you roll a 6, it's kind of like a critical success. Something good is going to happen. But it gets even more complicated when you find out that the degrees of success are not quite what you would expect in a normal game. So degrees of success is something that appears in a lot of different RPGs, and it's basically how well did you perform the task. Dungeons and Dragons does not have a degrees of success mechanic, though there are a few OGL-based games, and I think Pathfinder has flirted with optional rules that involve a degree of success mechanic. Effectively, if you roll a set amount above or a set amount below a specific thing, something extra happens. 4th edition had a few mechanics where it was actually, if you fail this roll by this much, then this additional bad thing happens. That's effectively a degree of success. Degrees of success in this are very, very different. So first things first, there are 4 ways that a roll can go. You can get a failure. You don't hit the difficulty score, or whatever it's called in this. I should probably just stick to the glossary of game terms. You don't hit the difficulty number. That's a failure. What you were trying to do doesn't work. On top of that, there are 3 different versions of success. A standard success, you meet the number. This, in most games, would be just success. You know, hey, I hit the number, that means I do what I want, right? Not quite in this. A standard success is literally that. It means that you rolled 3d6, you add whatever modifier to it that you're going to add, and it's higher than the difficulty number. Okay, so that means you do what you do, but a standard success means that you succeed, but with some mitigating circumstance. It's a yes, but. That means your standard form of succeeding at things also come with a caveat. In combat, it generally means if you make an attack against a creature and you get a standard success, you're going to do damage to them, but they're also going to do half damage to you. And I'll explain why that's not nearly as broke as it sounds when we get to talking about how combat works in this. But so that's something that's kind of interesting. Generally, like in the Open Legend system, which is another system I have a significant amount of experience in. I've been running an Open Legend game for almost 6 years at this point. We're actually getting to our final few episodes. I run it for Zelda Universe. In Open Legend, if you fail, one of the rules of Open Legend is called every roll matters. They never want you to make a roll and nothing happens. If you're having the characters roll, the story needs to proceed. And so if you fail, a couple different things can happen. You can fail, meaning you might succeed at what you're doing, but you succeed at a cost. You might fail in a way that a new complication arises that you have to deal with. Or you may just outright fail, but the story moves on. An example is you're trying to pick a lock. Fail with or fail where you succeed, but with a caveat. You say that you hear click, and you suddenly you see the lock open, but as soon as you do that, you hear someone behind you go, "Hey, what are you doing?" So you did succeed what you want, but you succeeded at a cost. By succeeding, you also have alerted people to your presence. Failing and moving the story forward is you're kind of picking the lock, and then the lockpick breaks, and now you cannot pick that lock anymore because the lock is broken. So you have to decide on a different outlook. There's never going to be a situation in Open Legend where you roll something, go, "Oh, I failed. Well, I'm going to try and do it again." Nope, every roll should push the story forward. So that's kind of what I kind of view a standard success is it's that you fail at, or you succeed at a cost. And I've never seen that being the default success for any system before. I think that's really, really interesting. A great success is one where you not only do you defeat the target number, but you also roll doubles. 2 of the dice roll doubles, and they don't have to include the Kismet die. So that's a great success, and that's what most people would consider a success. That's you do exactly what you wanted to do, and there's no real downside. If you get triples where all 3 numbers are the same, and you succeed on the you roll higher than the difficulty number, then you get what's called an extraordinary success, which is effectively your kind of critical hit. Well, what? Wait a minute. You said that the Kismet die is your critical hit. Well, and that's where things start getting a little bit interesting. So there's another aspect of the tabletop game Talisman that we didn't talk about. There's 4 stats for any character. You have your strength, you have your craft, you have your gold, because you use gold to buy things, and it's measured 1, 2, 3. Like, you don't have like 40 gold or something like that. Anyone that would ever get 40 gold in that game is doing something very, very right or very, very wrong, because most items cost 1 or 2 gold pieces, maybe 3. But the final thing you have is what's called the fate. And fate's different for every character. Some characters get a lot of fate, some characters get a little fate. But what you can use fate for in the Talisman board game is you can use it to re-roll dice, which is really important. Because again, in a game where luck and random chance is such a huge factor, knowing when to use your fate points is essential to doing well. That's one of the few times where you get to manipulate the probability in your favor generally, and knowing when it's a good idea to try and roll your fate die and when it's not, or use your fate to re-roll a die, is essential in playing the game. So fate exists in Talisman Adventures, but is very different. There are 2 different flavors of fate. There is light fate, and there is dark fate. Light fate is something that is tracked by light fate is something that is tracked individually by each character. Dark fate is a resource that the GM has. Kind of similar, if you remember any of my Essence 20 deep dives, this is similar to story points, where the players get story points and the GM gets story points. The difference being, instead of the players sharing a pool of light fate, each individual character has their own pool of light fate, and the GM has their own pool of dark fate, which is generated by everyone. And I'm just looking for the rules about bonus degrees of success. The Kismet die. Okay. So basically, the Kismet die, when you roll a 1 on the Kismet die, a Dark Fate point is generated. When you roll a 6 on the Kismet die, a Light Fate point is generated. And the interesting thing about it, there are certain abilities and things like that that say if you roll a 6 on the Kismet die, or if they roll a 1 on the Kismet die, this particular thing can happen. And a lot of times that will give you a choice between, okay, generate a fate point, or this thing happens when it's the light fate. The dark fate, I believe it's just bad things happen and a dark fate point for the most part. So that makes this a very, very interesting game because fate itself, fate itself can be used a bunch of different ways. You can use it to add what's called a bonus die. Bonus die means instead of rolling 3d6, you roll 4d6. But you still only add 3 of those dice together. You just get to choose which one of those dice you use, other than the Kismet die. You always have to use the Kismet die. But it does add an interesting idea, because if you roll doubles, you might throw out your highest die if the doubles give you a great success. So it's an interesting aspect. You can also use it to re-roll one of the die. If you're going to add a bonus die, you have to use that before you make the roll. After the rolls happen, you can burn a light fate point to re-roll a die. If you get a standard success, you can burn a light fate to turn it into a great success. And then there's certain special abilities that require you to burn light fate points. And then if you fail a death save, you can burn a light fate to not die. So it's an interesting system, and the GM has a bunch of different things that they can use their dark fate to do things. Just because how monsters just play differently than characters. A lot of times monsters aren't making attack rolls too much. A lot of times it's the player characters that are making defense rolls and things like that. Kind of similar to the Cypher system, though the DM does make rolls every so often. So yeah, that system in and of itself does add that little bit of kind of unpredictability and randomness to it, and the fate system is designed to control that a little bit. Again, very, very much like the Talisman board game. Now, that being said, as I mentioned before, like you have strength and you have craft, but strength is kind of subdivided into brawn, agility, and metal. Craft is separated into insight, wits, and resolve. So again, if you're used to a more 6 attribute system, they do kind of have something like that. But without getting into too many details as far as just how the system is run, you're not always going to be using everything the exact same way. Like it's a little bit more complicated than I want to get into in this just kind of overview. If you guys are interested in a more in-depth study of how everything works, let me know in the comments below. I will 100% do an in-depth review of the book of this, because it's an interesting book and it's very, very pretty. Just like the board game, the artwork and everything on the board game is amazing. So yeah, you have a life score. You can wear armor. There's a set list of skills that you can have. There are certain skills, like most skills, even if you're not trained in them or don't have them as one of your skills, you can still make rolls for them. There are a few skills that you are required to know in order to make a roll for them. So things like sleight of hand or spellcasting, if you don't have that as a skill, then you can't make a spellcasting skill check or a sleight of hand check because it's a specialized thing. Yeah, and then you can get focuses, which just gives you an extra buff to certain aspects. And focuses are a little bit closer to kind of like specializations in the Essence 20 system, where like you might have an athletics focus of acrobatics. Well, Athletics can use brawn, agility, or metal, depending on what specifically you're doing, and acrobatics might apply to any one of those roles. So it's it's another one of those things where you're going to go, well, I think my acrobatic skill would make sense for this, and the GM gets to kind of disagree. It's not quite the bargaining system that we saw in like the Cypher games or Essence 20 games, but it still does have a little bit of that interpretation aspect where it's going to be in a player's best interest to go, well, I have this focus. Can I use this focus for this test? It's not quite as hard and fast as like Dungeons and Dragons, where it is, I need you to make me a wisdom intelligence, or I mean a wisdom insight check. And the only thing you get to use is the wisdom ability modifier and your insight skill, which is based on wisdom. So anyway, yeah. As far as like, again, as far as like the characters you can create, the ancestries, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. There's 7 different ancestries: dwarf, elf, ghoul, human, laywalker, sprite, and troll. Again, this is all based on the tabletop game. So it's not what you would expect from a fantasy RPG. You know, one of the default races you can choose is ghoul. It's an undead. Laywalkers are interesting to they're kind of like fey creatures. Like the picture they have here is of a kind of like a fawn, I guess would be the best description of it. Like deer legs from the waist down, and then humanoid from the waist up, and it has antlers. And then sprite and troll. Again, these are all things that showed up in the game. And then for the classes, you have... There are 10 classes: assassin, druid, minstrel, priest, prophet, scout, sorcerer, thief, warrior, wizard. All of those are characters in the board game. And the art that they use in here is the character art from the board game. Again, if you're familiar with the board game, you're going to feel very familiar with this tabletop Giga game. There's going to be a lot of things you're like, oh, I get it. But they make enough changes so that it actually works as an RPG. And like I said, when you build your characters, it is very much your class is going to define your character a lot. Your class and your race or your ancestry is going to be the only real differences. So you might have a dwarf assassin and a human assassin. Well, they're both assassins. You do get some ancestry abilities, and there are kind of sub-ancestries. I think there's 3 for each one. That will change some slight modifiers, but that's really it. Thank you, phone. That's really it. So again, this is the kind of RPG where having 2 players play the same class is not going to be very much fun, because anything that you can do, the other person in your class is probably going to be able to do. Even when you start getting into advanced special abilities, again, because not only there's a limited number of class special abilities, and as far as the general ones, I believe there's only 5 general ones, and there's generally only like between like 8 and 10 class special abilities, but quite a few of the class special abilities are exclusive, meaning if you choose this one, you can't choose this one. There's generally 2 or 3 of those per class. So if you do that, you run down to, you only really have about 5 or 6 different abilities that you can choose as you level up, and some of them require you to have a pretty high score in a certain attribute, meaning you're not going to be able to take it until later levels. So despite the fact that it's built to be kind of very open-ended, it really isn't, because you're so limited in the choices that you make in the core rule book. There are some expansions, but I don't own any of them yet, so I don't know how many more things they add in. But effectively, despite the fact that, yes, you do have some choice in it, it's such limited choice that an assassin is going to be an assassin, is going to be an assassin, is going to be an assassin, is going to be an assassin. Even if you make different choices, the higher level you get, the more likely you're going to almost be forced to have the same abilities. In the same way where I've mentioned, if you give a character in D&D, I've mentioned this like with the Rune Warrior, I think it was. It was one of the fighters' subclasses. If if you say, okay, well, we're going to let you choose between these 6 different things, but you give them 5 choices over the lifetime of their character, well, all you're doing is telling them basically choose the most useful one for your first choice, and then each additional choice is just less useful and less fun. Meaning, as you level up, your abilities become less powerful and less influential because the good ones are the ones that you chose first. And that's kind of what I get a feeling from this. So yeah, be aware if you're starting this. This is not a game that I would recommend planning a 5.5-year campaign to run in it. This to me feels really great for one shots or little mini campaigns between larger campaigns, just to kind of do something different. It is significantly less intensive. I'm planning on designing new dragons for this, just like Cypher. So we're going to build a couple characters in this system just to get an idea of what it's like. And my thought process is going to be that it's going to be very, very they're going to be relatively short episodes because there's just not a whole lot of choice to make. Choose your ancestry, choose your class, choose a focus for the class effectively, where it's one ability. You have one, or you have 2 abilities that you get to choose one at level 1 for each class, and they are exclusive. Or mutually exclusive. So if you choose one, you can't choose the other later on. And that's really it. So yeah, overall, like the lore and everything for this, something that I do kind of enjoy. They include what's called a map of the realm. Anyone that has played the board game is going to recognize the quote-unquote map of the realm because it has almost all of the locations from the board game on there. The difference being, if we have the board game right here, all right? Normally, things like the city is up here, the village is right here, the what is it? The tavern is here, and I think the chapel is here. And then you have the Bridge Sentinel, which is right here, and then that goes into the inner ring, and like the Warlock's Cave is here, and like the castle is here, and then you have the door that gets you into the inner ring is like right here, and then the castle command is right in the center. So if you look at the map of the realm, the first thing you'll notice, the city is at the bottom of the map, and there's a little bit behind the city. And the village is at the top of the map. And there's a few other things like the Great Forest or the Fallen Giant Wood, whereas on the map they were just generic woods. But I do like the fact that they have effectively translated the board game into a map, and to kind of show you that it is something very different, they've kind of twisted it, which I think is interesting and fun. The other thing that's kind of interesting, the combat. We have to talk about the combat before we're done with this. So I mentioned before, if you get a standard success, you basically take damage from that. If we were playing something like D&D and every time you made an attack, you also had the chance of getting hit, and that was like the default thing, is if you make an attack, you're also going to get hit. That would be kind of damning, because it would give the enemy a significant advantage over you. However, that's where the unique aspect of combat comes in the idea that players don't roll initiative. All the players go first, and they get to choose who goes first. No one has to roll or anything. It's just like, this person goes first, then this person, then this person. They choose among themselves, and anytime they interact with a monster, again, there's always a chance that that monster can hit them as part of that attack. They get a standard. If they get a standard success, then they're going to take half damage. From whatever their attack would normally be, it would be half damage. If they get a failure, they actually just get the full blunt of an attack from the enemy. Well, then what happens when it's the enemy's turn? And this is the thing that's interesting. The way that this works is when all the players have gone, any enemy that hasn't interacted with a character yet gets a chance to use their action. Meaning, when the players pick which enemies to attack, they are actually partially deciding how many actions the enemies get. Because if you attack one bad guy 3 times, they effectively get 3 actions. Because for each time you attack, there's a chance that they could attack you back. When all of you are done, all of you have decided to focus fire. There's 4 enemies there. There's four allies. You all decide to focus fire one of the enemies. And it takes all 4 of you, but you do eventually get rid of the enemy with like 3 of you actually taking damage. 1 of you got a great success. Cool. That's great. But because those other 3 enemies have not acted at all this turn, they each get an action that they can take. However, 4v4, exact same situation, each character interacts with one of the enemies. Well, at the end of combat, every single enemy has already taken their action when you attacked them. Even if you get a great success and take no damage, the only bad guys that get to act in a round are the ones that haven't interacted with a character. So that massively changes kind of the action economy and how you want to play. Again, in D&D, focus firing is a really, really effective tactic, because if you can take out an enemy before they get a chance to act, you have just changed the action economy for it. You've taken away a bunch of actions from the enemy. In this, spreading out and hitting multiple enemies can be more beneficial in certain situations. Now, there are some more powerful enemies that get multiple actions. If not enough characters interact with them for them to use all of their actions, they'll get to use the remainder of those at the end. But again, it creates a very, very different style of combat, which I really, really like. I think it's really interesting. I don't think it's something that you could translate to D&D. The system is not built for it, nor do I think you could use it in really any other system. This system is specifically designed around this idea that the players have a massive amount of control over how things work, and enemies are generally going to be reactionary, and I think that's really interesting and fun. Overall, like I said, the system itself I think is really interesting because I am a massive fan of the tabletop board game. I think this is really, really cool and interesting. Again, because I've played so many different RPGs, I know without actually playing the game, I can tell you right now, this is not a system that I would ever want to run an entire campaign built around. And by that I mean, I am currently running 3 campaigns right now. One of them has been running for 5.5 years. Another one has been running for, I think, around that, somewhere between 4 to 6 years. The other one has been running for like 1.5 years, 2 years. When I say campaign, I mean something that's going to run for years. Mini campaigns like what I did with Power Rangers, when it only goes for a month, I think this game is perfect for something like that, where you can dig into it, you can have fun, maybe doing something for 6 months if you play every week or you play multiple times a week. For me, the big limiting factor is I generally can only play for about 2 or 3 hours at a time. So even playing once a week, I'm not getting that far. And that's just mental health and my disabilities. But I could definitely see this being a great. I might even next December or maybe for something else I might do a mini campaign using this. I think it's really great. The other thing I think is really really cool right now, and I found this out through Twitter. I'm gonna look up what they are. There we go. So there is a Twitter account called Deals on RPGs, which is apparently like nobody follows these people. They have less than 1,000 followers, which I find shocking. It's at Deals on RPGs, and they just tweet about sales on RPG stuff. They'll tweet stuff about Bundle of Holding. They'll tweet about Humble Bundle. They tweet about Amazon sales. A lot of the stuff is when D&D books are on sales because they're on sale constantly. But they did tweet specifically about Talisman Adventures because now until March 2023, according to RPG Deals, you can actually get Talisman Adventures, the core book, which I believe is normally $20. It is currently free. I got it through DriveThruRPG, which is the kind of non-D&D version of the DM's Guild. The DM's Guild is exclusively D&D content. DriveThruRPG is everything else. They're owned by the same company, One Shelf Publishing, I think they are. I actually used to know the founder of One Bookshelf, maybe whatever the company is. I used to know the founder because he owned a game store that I ran their tabletop. I ran their Adventure League program for like a year or two, maybe a little longer. I can't remember at this point. But yeah, I used to know the guy. I think I interacted with him a few times. He's passed away, unfortunately. He was an ass, to be perfectly honest. Not to speak ill of the dead, but he was absolutely an ass. Did not interact with people very well, but he made a great website. Anyway, I'll have a link to the DriveThruRPG, link to it, so you can download it for free. And yeah, like I said, I mean, for free, this is great. They have, I've seen 2 official supplements. One's like $20, and it comes with 2 new character classes and some other stuff. I haven't purchased that because I didn't want to spend money on this, because I have no money. And then the other one's like $40, and seems to be like a combination monster manual and a bunch of other things. People are not pleased about how expensive it is, but that's what it is. But anyway, yeah, I mean, it's free, so definitely pick it up. And like I said, we're going to be doing some... I think this is a really, really great thing, especially for people that, with everything happening right now, even if you are like me and you have no plans of ditching Dungeons & Dragons for... because, again, all of this stuff has been... The vast majority of it has been lies and manipulation. Even if you have no plans of leaving the D&D... it's never a bad idea to look at something new, and because of just how different this is from Dungeons and Dragons, I think this is a really, really nice kind of palate cleanser style game, where you can play this for like a month or two, or maybe just, a few weeks or something like that. Get to play something where you're not massively invested in your characters and they don't have 6-page long backstories that use APA citations for all of their neuroses and things like that. You create a real simple character, you go on some adventures, and you have some fun. I think this is a perfect way to do that. But anyway, that is going to be all for me today. As always, remember to like the video, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell icon, turn notifications on. All those things are super, super important in the comments down below. First of all, have you ever played Talisman? And if so, how many friends have you lost because of it? Second of all, are you guys interested in me doing an actual in-depth review of the Talisman book? Because like I said, I'm totally happy doing that. But it's one of those things, like I'm being a little bit more careful about my in-depth reviews, not because I'm worried about anything happening, but just because this past, 3 or 4 months has been really, really rough on me. And with starting effectively 2 brand new series, it's just easier for me to focus on the series unless something big happens. Like the next D&D book, I'm going to do an in-depth review. No matter what happens with D&D, I'm going to review. There's only like this is the last year of 5th edition content coming out. I'm going to review all the books. Even if you've decided that you hate D&D and you're going to boycott everything, which by the way you're not because you don't understand what a boycott is, but go for it. Even if you're really, really mad, unfortunately, I'm going to cover them because I want to see, to use really macabre terms, I want to see what the death of D&D looks like. You know, I want to see what their last books look like for 5th edition, and I plan on owning every single 5th edition book. I am that committed to D&D 5th edition. It has been a massive part of my life. So, but yeah, so I'm going to do that. But beyond that, I just haven't been, like, I didn't do anything in December because it was December and I had Daily December to deal with. And I'm probably not going to do an in-depth review for January just because, again, I'm starting a brand new series and I'm trying to figure out how it's going to work. So, yeah. But I'm more than happy if people, any of the things that I do, designing new, or discovering new dragons on, if any of you guys are interested in an in-depth review, let me know in the comments down below. And if enough people are interested, I will definitely do it. I'm just not going to go out of my way to do an in-depth review on something that nobody cares about. Along the same veins, any new Essence 20 book that I could afford to get, I'm probably going to do an in-depth review as well. Though with inflation, everything right now, things have it has become significantly more difficult for me to purchase full price books and stuff like that. So another reason why I immediately jumped on this. It didn't cost me money. Anyway, again, that is going to be all for me today. I will see you guys next time. All right? Bye-bye.